Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Tony D's music channel. I'm Tony DeMeo, and today I will be praising and raving about George Harrison's album 33&13rd from 1976. I just showed you the CD. This is the vinyl, a used work of vinyl that I got nearby at Squeezebox Books and Records store. Now, I want to tell you about how I discovered the album. I was 16 years old. I had already gotten 2 Harrison albums for Christmas as the year before, All Things Must Pass and Living in the Material World. Albums that I didn't really like at that time because I just did not understand the songs on the albums because most of them were dealing with what was happening in George's life at that time. And most of them were very profoundly spiritual and religious. And I didn't really want to hear someone preaching religion at me when other people were doing the same thing. But 33&13rd is different than those two because it was the first album of George's solo career where he wasn't preaching to his audience. He was just being a fun, joyful guy. And there are many different sides of George Harrison. There's the profound spiritual side, the philosophical side, and then there's the fun, humorous, joyful side, which you get on this album. He really puts all those different sides of himself on the song in this album. I can look back in my memory bank and just remember being 21 years old, 22, 23, and just listening to this album and completely being on cloud 9, which is a different George Harrison album that I also really love. Now, we got to talk about where George was in his life at the time he made this album. He had just divorced his first wife, Pattie Boyd, who then got together with Eric Clapton, and then George hooked up with Olivia Trinidad, who was working at the record label that he started. I believe it was A&M. I'm not sure about that. And they got married. And you finally hear a happy George on this album after 2 albums in a row of a very sad George. On Dark Horse and on Extra Texture, he's a very sad George Harrison. But here he's very happy. Although, the first song on the album is a really pissed off George Harrison. Let's talk about the songs here. Woman Don't You Cry For Me is the first song on here. And it's a very bluesy song that George had started writing, I believe, several years before the album came out. I've always interpreted this song as George being pissed off at Pattie and wanting her to get out of his life. But it was probably just a song that wasn't about his personal life. I don't think it was personal. It's Woman Don't You Cry For Me, where he's really being chauvinistic. Let's be honest about that. George was chauvinistic. And you can hear that on a few songs in this album. And we got to talk about the band on this album, which was a band that George Harrison loved playing with. If you look in this book, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, The Music of George Harrison by Simon Lang, you can learn all about the musicians who played on the album. On this album, he had Gary Wright on keyboards, Willie Weeks on bass guitar, someone that George enjoyed playing with far more than Paul McCartney, since Paul McCartney made him feel like a younger brother. I do not like that Paul would treat George that way. You had Alvin Taylor on drums and Richard T on organ. And it's a real shame that there was no tour for this album. If he had toured in 76, right after this album came out, I could see that being a hugely popular selling tour. Especially when McCartney just toured with a #1 hit album, Wings of the Speed of Sound, that year. Imagine what Harrison could have done. And Willie Weeks was tremendous on the bass guitar. It's his bass that starts off the album. It's sort of like how on a Ringo album, on Choose Love, it's Ringo's drum to start off the album. On this album, you hear Willie Weeks' bass right away. You know, as I was saying, Woman Don't You Cry For Me is a great song in the blues style, where he's really singing about how his new passion is the Lord, his Hindu Lord, his spirituality. And he's basically telling the woman in his life to go away, just leave me alone. Now, if you read Petty Boyd's memoir, Wonderful Tonight, you'll see that that was kind of how George really was. Because in the early 70s, when he was really into Hare Krishna and Hinduism for the first time, he focused way more on his Hindu Hare Krishna friends than on her. And so maybe this song is really autobiographical. And maybe he was speaking about Patty here. It was not released until he was with Olivia, but I think it's about Patty. Now, for a more gentle song that's not chauvinistic, we go to track 2, Dear One. Now, like many George Harrison songs, Dear One is a song that could either be spiritual in nature or it could be a loving ballad about a woman. I mean, the song does reference someone who creates life, which could be a woman. In George's case, it's probably the Lord. Dear One is just absolutely gorgeous. My spirit sings to you. It's one of those songs that I just remember so many times listening to with absolute joy and just pure bliss. And the third track was also written several years before the album. And if you have this box set of All Things Must Pass, it's on CD 4 with take 1. Take 1 of the song Beautiful Girl, which again is not chauvinistic at all. Although actually, a few lyrics in there are chauvinistic. Not the kind of girl you want to go handing around. So he's basically saying she's not a groupie. Thanks a lot, George, for that compliment. Now, Beautiful Girl is a great song on acoustic guitar, mostly. That's how it started off, anyway. And now here, it's in its fully fleshed out form. Not the kind of girl you want to go handing around. Got to keep her right there. That is a little bit chauvinistic, George. Come on, we got to admit that. And now, track 4 is one of the 2 songs on the album that's really George just being humorous George and just making himself the butt of the joke. And that's this song, the song that referenced how George lost a lawsuit where he was found guilty of plagiarism for his #1 hit, My Sweet Lord, which people thought was him plagiarizing the song One Fine Day, or no, it was He's So Fine. Now, George did not intend to plagiarize that. They even called it subconscious plagiarism. But if it's subconscious, how can you be found guilty for it when you didn't know you were doing it? But anyway, the song is just a blast. And if you want the music video, get this DVD, The Best of the Dark Horse Years. The Dark Horse Years. It has the music video for this song. And I believe Eric Idle directed both music videos. I believe he did. And of course, Monty Python, Eric Idle. Harrison loved Monty Python. And they were great friends. And he directed both these music videos for this song and for Crackerbox Palace. Crackerbox Palace, if you see the video, it all takes place at George's Friar Park mansion, which is huge. And George is quite literally in a stroller in the video, because he's singing about when he was very young. You need to check out the music videos, either on DVD or on YouTube, for Crackerbox Palace and this song. And this song was a single in '76. It was not a huge hit. It was somewhere in the top 40. But it should have been a much bigger hit. This song, by the way. Yeah, he's poking fun at himself in that song. The video has a judge in a courtroom. A much more humorous courtroom than the real courtroom, which is a joke anyway. But now I want to go on to the next two tracks, which sort of have something in common. And that's See Yourself. Now, See Yourself is all about what happened back in 1967 when this newspaper journalist interviewed Paul McCartney and asked him if he did LSD, to which Paul said, yes, he did. And then the reporter acted as though Paul was being a hypocrite and was a bad role model for young people, but Paul and the other Beatles never pretended to be role models for young people. So this guy had it all backwards. He was trying to smear Paul for something that he didn't really want. He didn't want to be a role model. And this song called See Yourself is really telling this journalist, maybe you should look inward before you judge other people. It's easier to see a fly than it's easier to kill a fly than it is to let it loose. George was a peaceful man, very peaceful. And because of his Hindu religion, he believed in peace, he believed in nonviolence. He did not believe in judging people, he believed in forgiveness. These are very important things about George that we love. And of course, the next track that I really love is It's What You Value. Now again, also a deep meaning with this song. Not that deep, obviously, but it's also about a person that he knew, and that'll be Jim Keltner, one of the greatest session drummers of all time. I am his biggest cheerleader. He worked on many albums for George Harrison, and Ringo, and John. And he loved cars so much, he didn't really want to be paid in money for his work on the album. He just wanted a new car in return. And that's what this song is about. It's all about his love for cars and how that's what he values. It's all up to what you value in your motor car. And it's such a funky, cool track with this great funky beat. And George is just, again, on these songs, he just sounds the happiest he's ever been in his career on this album. Besides Cloud 9 and 33&13rd, this is George Harrison's happiest album. I'd rather listen to George being really happy than being deep and sad and depressed. I'd rather listen to the happy George. And this is what you get on this album. It's absolutely a goldmine of George happiness. Now, the next track is a cover, but I did not know it was a cover for ages. And that's the song True Love, written by Cole Porter. If I didn't know it was by Cole Porter, I was sworn by George. He really makes it his own. Now, I don't really know why George did a cover of Cole Porter. It's a really good cover, though. And I will say, you have to hear it. You have to hear it. And then we get to Pure Smokey, which the Smokey in Pure Smokey is Smokey Robinson from The Miracles. All four Beatles were fans of The Miracles and covered them a number of times on record. And boy, is this not the greatest tribute to Smokey Robinson you have ever heard or ever will hear. And I can't even think of that many tributes to Smokey Robinson in song. But isn't it amazing that George made this tribute to him? It's fantastic. And Crackerbox Palace is next on the album, which, I just love when Crackerbox Palace plays anywhere. I just love it. And by the way, if you were able to see George Harrison on Saturday Night Live back in November 1976, he was on the show with Paul Simon, and they performed two songs together, not songs from this album, but in addition to that, they also screened music videos for this song and Crackerbox Palace. If you can find that episode of SNL anywhere, it's not on TV, which it should be, but if you can find it, try to go to YouTube, try to get a DVD. You need to see that episode. And now for the last track on the album, and just an absolute dynamite ballad / spiritual song, whatever you want to call it. and that's Learning How to Love You. Now, I mentioned George Harrison's chauvinism on this album earlier, but this song is quite possibly the most romantic song he has ever written. Now, knowing George, which I do, I believe he wrote this song as a spiritual song, as in learning how to love you, learning how to love the Lord. But this song is perfect whether you're thinking about meditating, whether you're thinking about the Lord, or whether you're making love. Because, as I said, it's the most romantic song he's ever written. I'm alone with my heart and learning how to love you. It's absolutely gorgeous. I can so easily envision it as a song to make love to, or a song when thinking about spirituality. And that's the album. It's either my number 2 favorite George Harrison album, or it's tied with being my first with Cloud 9. I just cannot declare one better than the other one. To me, they're both equal, because they both give me that feeling of pure bliss. I listen to this album, and I can just picture myself back in Naperville, where I was in college, and listening to this on my iPod, which I gave away foolishly, and it's just pure bliss, pure joy, pure happiness, pure euphoria, not the TV show, the feeling. And I do wish George had more albums that just had this pure bliss feeling. I think that's why it took me ages and ages to really understand albums of his, like Living in the Material World, Nothing Must Pass. Because they're just really heavy for someone who's young and doesn't know everything that's going on in his life at that time. But please, tell me what it was like for you the first time you heard this. Was it back in 76? Was it 86, 96, 2006? And I am curious why the CD from 2004 has Tears of the World as a bonus track. Now, I mentioned that song in a previous video, which he recorded around 1980, 1979, and then got rejected by Mo Ost and Warner Bros. Records. But then, why isn't on the CD of this, which is an album from 76? It's very curious, isn't it? But this is the gold mine of an album. This is a treasure trove. And let me know in the comments what you think. And please, like the video, share the video on social media, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll be talking more about George Harrison albums.